Welcome back to Listen Stories In and Enjoy Game Channel. The night my husband tried to destroy me, he had no idea I had already buried him. It was my son Daniel's wedding, the most important day of his life, and the day I had spent months perfecting down to the smallest detail. The chandeliers glowed like falling stars. Soft music floated through the hall, and every table was filled with people who had watched my family grow for decades. It was supposed to be a celebration of love. Instead, it became a stage for betrayal. Halfway through dinner, just as laughter and glasses clinking filled the room, my husband of 30 years, Richard Hale, stood up slowly. There was something strange about the way he moved, something rehearsed, almost theatrical. He didn't sit back down. He didn't smile at our son. He didn't even look at the bride. He looked straight at me. "Everyone," he said, tapping his glass lightly. "I have something important to say." The room fell silent instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks hovered in the air. My son, Daniel, turned toward him with a confused smile, thinking it was just another toast. But I knew, I don't know how, but deep inside, something in me went cold. "Clara," Richard continued, his voice calm, almost too calm. "We've been married for a long time, but some things come to an end." I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. "This is the end for us," he said. A gasp rippled across the hall. "I found someone else." And then he gestured. Right across from me sat her, Emily Carter, young, beautiful, wearing a red dress that screamed confidence, sitting at my family table like she belonged there, like she had already replaced me. And the worst part, she smiled, not awkwardly, not nervously. She smiled like she had already won. For a brief second, the entire world went silent. I couldn't hear the music anymore. I couldn't hear the people breathing. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" he said, his voice shaking with anger. But I raised my hand. "Sit down," I told him gently, because something inside me had already shifted. Richard thought he was humiliating me, but what he didn't know was that I had been waiting for this moment. For weeks. "No need to make a scene," Richard said, as if he were the reasonable one. "I just thought it was time to be honest." Honest, the word almost made me laugh. 30 years of marriage, reduced to a public announcement at our son's wedding. Emily lifted her glass slightly, almost like she was toasting me. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. Carefully, cruelly, publicly. He wanted to break me. He wanted everyone to see me fall apart. He wanted to walk away looking like the man who finally chose happiness. While I became the abandoned wife no one pitied, only whispered about. But Richard made one mistake. Just one. He underestimated me. Slowly, I leaned forward, my hands resting calmly on the table. My voice, when I spoke, was softer than anyone expected. "Well," I said, "thank you for telling me." The confusion on his face was immediate. That wasn't the reaction he wanted. That wasn't the reaction he planned for. Before he could say anything else, I reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. Simple, plain, but heavier than anything he could imagine. "I think," I continued, sliding it across the table toward him, "you should read this." The room held its breath. Richard frowned slightly, looking down at the envelope like it was something insignificant. He had no idea at all. Before he could open it, I stood up. I smoothed down my dress, the one I had chosen carefully for this day, the one I had imagined wearing as I celebrated my son's future. Then I leaned down and kissed Daniel on the forehead. "I'm proud of you," I whispered. His eyes were full of confusion, pain, and something else. Respect. And then, without looking back at Richard or Emily, I walked away. Every step echoed in that silent hall. No tears, no shouting, no breaking down, just dignity. As I reached the doors, I paused for half a second, not because I was weak, but because I knew exactly what was about to happen next. And right on cue, a scream exploded behind me. Loud, raw, panicked, the kind of scream that doesn't come from anger. It comes from realization, from fear, from the moment someone understands they've just lost everything. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to, because I already knew what was inside that envelope. Divorce papers, bank statements, proof of betrayal, and the one thing that would destroy him completely, the clause he himself had insisted on years ago, the one that would cost him everything. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt free. But if you think that moment was the end of the story, you're wrong. That was just the beginning. Because what Richard didn't know was that I had spent the last 6 weeks planning his downfall. And by the time he finished reading that envelope, he wasn't just losing his wife. He was losing his money, his reputation, his future, and the woman he thought he was leaving me for. Everything. If betrayal had a sound, it wouldn't be shouting. It would be silence. The kind of silence that settles in your chest when something feels wrong, but you don't yet have proof. That's how it started. Not with a confession, not with a mistake, but with a feeling. 6 months before Daniel's wedding, I noticed the smallest change, so small that any other wife might have ignored it. Richard stopped leaving his phone on the table. That was it. For 30 years, my husband had been careless with everything: his keys, his wallet, even his schedule. But suddenly, his phone became protected. Always face down, always in his pocket, always with him, even in the bathroom. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. People change, habits change, but instincts don't lie. Then came the late nights. Client meetings, he would say casually, loosening his tie as he walked in past 10 p.m. Big account. Important deal. I believed him. Not because it made sense, but because I wanted it to. That's the dangerous thing about love. It teaches you how to ignore the truth. Weeks passed. The pattern grew stronger. The distance between us wider. He stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing the little things, stopped being present, even when he was sitting right next to me. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was organizing our home office, preparing financial documents for tax season, something I had done every year without fail. Numbers had always been my world. Details never escaped me. That's why I noticed it immediately. A credit card statement that didn't belong. It wasn't in our usual file. It wasn't part of our shared accounts. And most importantly, I had never seen it before. The envelope was addressed to Richard. My hands paused. For a second, I considered putting it back, pretending I hadn't seen it, because deep down, I already knew opening it would change everything. But I opened it anyway. And the moment I did, my world shifted. Luxury restaurants, jewelry stores, 5-star hotels, weekend getaways, thousands of dollars spent on things that had nothing to do with our life, nothing to do with me. The total balance, $9,200. My fingers tightened around the paper. This wasn't business. This wasn't normal. This was a secret. And secrets always have a story behind them. That night, I waited. I watched him walk through the door, loosen his tie, and sit down like everything was normal, like our life hadn't just cracked open. Long day, I asked calmly. The usual, he replied without looking up. Clients, paperwork, you know how it is. I placed the statement on the table in front of him. For a split second, his face changed, just a flicker. But I saw it, and that was all I needed. What's this? I asked. He didn't panic. He didn't get angry, he smiled. Business expenses, he said smoothly. Client entertainment. I told you I'm expanding. These things cost money. On a separate card, I asked. Tax reasons, he replied instantly. Too instantly. Then he leaned back, like the conversation was over. Worry about it, Clara. I've got everything under control. That was the moment I realized something important. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared, which meant he thought I would believe him. He thought I wouldn't question him. He thought I was still the same woman who trusted him blindly. And that was his biggest mistake. Because I didn't confront him again. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. Instead, I started watching carefully, quietly. The next few weeks became something I never imagined my life would turn into, an investigation. I noticed everything. The way he smiled at his phone, but not at me. The way he started dressing better, not for me. The way he suddenly cared about his appearance again after years of indifference. And most importantly, the name that kept appearing, Emily. At first, it was casual. Emily handled the paperwork, scheduled the meeting. Emily's really efficient. Over time, the way he said her name changed, softer, warmer, personal. That's when I knew. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof, real proof, because I wasn't going to confront him without it. And I definitely wasn't going to lose everything without a fight. So one afternoon, I did something I never thought I would do. I followed him. He left the office around 6 p.m., not late enough to be suspicious, not early enough to be innocent. I kept my distance, my heart pounding harder with every turn he made. And then he stopped, not at a client's office, not at a restaurant we knew, but at a quiet, upscale hotel on the edge of the city. My hands went cold. I watched from across the street. 5 minutes passed, then 10. And then she walked out, Emily Carter. Younger than I expected, confident, beautiful in a way that wasn't natural. It was calculated. She looked around briefly, then smiled, and walked straight toward him, not like colleagues, not like friends, like something else entirely, something that made my chest tighten. He stepped out of the car, and without hesitation, he kissed her, not quickly, not secretly, but like a man who had nothing to hide. That was the moment my marriage ended, not at the wedding, not when he made his announcement, but right there, watching him give everything I thought was mine to someone else. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. I just sat there and watched, because something inside me changed in that moment. Something cold, something clear, something powerful. I realized something that most people never understand when they're betrayed. Emotion is a weapon. And the moment you lose control of it, you lose everything. So I didn't confront him. I didn't go home and argue. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I went back to the credit union the next day, and I started digging. If Richard thought he was hiding something, he had no idea who he was hiding it from. Because for 30 years, I had worked with numbers, with accounts, with patterns. And secrets always leave patterns behind. What I found was worse than I imagined, much worse. Because this wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something deeper, something planned, something financial. Something that would not only break my heart, but try to destroy my future. And that's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to cry and beg and fall apart. No. If Richard wanted to play games, I was going to end them. But not with anger, with strategy. Because what he didn't know was that every move he was making, I was already tracking. And by the time he realized what I was doing, it would already be too late. Revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with clarity. And the moment I stopped feeling like a wife and started thinking like an investigator, that's when I began to win. The day after I followed Richard and saw him with Emily, I walked into the credit union like it was any other normal morning. I greeted my coworkers, made my coffee, and sat at my desk. But inside, nothing was normal anymore, because now I wasn't just a wife with suspicions. I was a woman looking for the truth, and the truth always hides in numbers. I started with what I already had, the secret credit card statement. The transactions were clean, organized, and easy to follow. Too easy, which meant one thing: that card wasn't the real secret. It was just a tool, so I dug deeper, using my access at work. I began tracking transaction patterns, not illegally, not recklessly, but carefully. I wasn't breaking rules. I was following clues. Every transfer leaves a shadow. Every account leaves a trail. And Richard had left a trail so obvious, it almost felt insulting. Small transfers. That's how it began. $500, $800, sometimes 1,000. Always spaced out, always subtle, always just small enough that someone careless would ignore it. But I wasn't careless. I followed each transfer like a thread. And eventually, they all led to the same place, a separate account. one I had never seen before, one that didn't exist in our shared records. My heart slowed as I accessed the details. Account holder, Richard Hale, secondary holder. Emily Carter. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, not because I was shocked, but because everything suddenly made sense. This wasn't just an affair. This was partnership, financial, intentional, real. I opened the transaction history. And that's when the full truth revealed itself. Over 45,000. That's dollars. How much was sitting in that account? Money that didn't come from his business. Money that didn't come from anywhere new. Money that came from us, from our savings, from our retirement, from the life we had built together. Every dollar had been quietly taken piece by piece and moved into a future that didn't include me. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't break. Because at that moment, I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was focused. I printed everything, every transaction, every transfer, every receipt. Then I kept going. Jewelry purchases under Emily's name. A luxury apartment lease, also under her name. Car payments, spa bookings, weekend travel reservations. Richard hadn't just fallen in love. He had invested in it, built it, funded it with my money, with our life. That was the moment something inside me completely shifted. Because betrayal is one thing, but theft changes everything. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. 30 years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of putting his dreams before mine. And this was the return. A secret life, a secret woman, a secret future. Paid for by me. That's when I realized something that changed the entire game. Richard thought he was in control, but he had made one critical mistake. He forgot who I was. I wasn't just his wife. I was the one who managed our finances. I was the one who understood money. I was the one who knew how systems worked. And most importantly, I was the one who could destroy everything he thought he had secured. But I didn't act immediately, because reacting quickly is what emotional people do. And emotional people lose instead. I built a plan, a real one, the kind that doesn't just hurt someone, it ends them. Step 1, document everything. I created copies of every statement, every transaction, every piece of evidence. I organized it perfectly, dates, amounts, connections. There would be no confusion, no denial, no escape. Step 2, stay invisible. At home, I became exactly what Richard expected, quiet, supportive, unaware. I made his coffee. I asked about his day. I smiled when he lied. And every time he thought he was getting away with something, I let him believe it, because the more confident he became, the more careless he got. And careless people leave bigger mistakes behind. Step 3, build leverage. I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed something stronger, something legal, something irreversible. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. Our prenuptial agreement. Richard had insisted on it before we got married. Back then, I didn't question it. I trusted him completely. I signed it without a second thought. But now, that document became my biggest weapon. That evening, after he fell asleep, I went into the study and found it. 32 pages, legal language, fine print, details I had never paid attention to before. Until now, I sat there for hours, reading every line carefully. And then I found it, a clause, hidden deep in the document, a condition Richard himself had demanded. If either party commits adultery, the financial protections become void. I froze, read it again, then again. And slowly, a smile formed on my face, because suddenly everything changed. Everything he thought he protected was gone. His business, his savings, his control, all of it depended on his loyalty. And he had already destroyed that. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the document. The irony was almost perfect. The man who thought he was smarter than everyone had built his own downfall and handed it to me. That was the moment I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to give him the chance to prepare. No, I was going to wait, because timing is everything. And the perfect moment was already coming. Daniel's wedding, a room full of witnesses, family, friends, people whose opinions mattered, a place where Richard would feel confident, untouchable, safe. And that's exactly where I would end him, not with anger, not with drama, but with truth, cold, clear, undeniable truth. I closed the prenuptial agreement and placed it back exactly where I found it. Then I went to bed. And for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully, because now I wasn't the woman being betrayed. I was the woman in control. And Richard, he had no idea that every step he took from this moment forward was leading him straight into a trap he built himself, a trap I was about to close. Revenge isn't powerful because it's loud. It's powerful when it's silent. By the time Richard thought he was winning, I had already written the ending of his story. The day after I discovered the clause in our prenuptial agreement, I didn't celebrate. I didn't relax. I didn't assume anything, because knowing the truth isn't enough. You need to know how to use it. And that meant one thing: I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. I needed someone who wouldn't just understand the law. I needed someone who would understand me. That's when I thought of Olivia Grant. We had met years ago in college. She had always been sharp, focused, and fearless, the kind of woman who didn't just win arguments, she ended them. Over the years, she had become one of the top family law attorneys in the city. If anyone could turn my situation into a victory, it was her. I called her that same afternoon. She said, surprised, "It's been a while. Everything okay?" "No," I replied calmly. "But it will be." Was a pause. Then her tone changed completely. "Come to my office," she said. "Bring everything." Next morning, I walked into her office carrying a simple folder. But inside that folder was everything Richard didn't want the world to see. Olivia didn't interrupt while I spoke. She listened carefully, every detail: the credit card, the hotel, the secret account, the transfers, the prenup. And when I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me in a way I'll never forget. Not with pity, not with sympathy, but with respect. "You didn't confront him," she said. "No, you gathered evidence first." "Yes." A small smile appeared on her face. "Good," she said. "That's why you're going to win." Then she opened the prenuptial agreement. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the turning of pages. Her expression changed slowly, first neutral, then interested, then impressed. "Clara," she said finally, placing the document down, "do you realize what you have here?" "A clause," I replied. She said, shaking her head slightly. "You have leverage." She pointed to the exact line I had read the night before. "The adultery clause," she said. This changes everything. Heart stayed calm, but my mind sharpened. Explain, I said. Olivia leaned forward. This clause voids the financial protections of the prenup if one party is unfaithful. That means everything he thought was protected, his business, his assets, his control, it's all exposed now. I didn't speak, I just listened. Combine that with what you've brought me, she continued, flipping through the evidence, bank transfers, a joint account with the other woman, documented spending. Clara, this isn't just infidelity. She looked up at me directly. This is financial misconduct. In that moment, the game changed completely. Bad is it for him? I asked quietly. Olivia smiled. The worst case scenario, she said. He loses the majority of his assets. The house, the savings, potentially even part of his business. Best case, I asked, for him. She said. I nodded. She leaned back again. There isn't one. Silence filled the room for a moment. Not heavy, not emotional, just final. Then what do we do? I asked. Olivia didn't hesitate. We strike first. That was the moment the plan truly began. Not emotional, not reactive, strategic, precise. First, Olivia explained, we file for divorce immediately, quietly, without informing him. Second, we freeze financial movement. That prevents him from hiding or transferring assets once he realizes what's happening. She continued, we let him make his mistake. I looked at her. What mistake? She smiled slightly. The one he's already planning. By that point, I already knew Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was preparing an exit. The expensive dinners, the apartment. The way Emily was becoming more present, more confident, more visible. This wasn't hidden anymore. This was building towards something public, something final. And I had a feeling I knew exactly when it would happen. Daniel's wedding, the perfect stage, the perfect audience, the perfect moment for Richard to walk away without looking like the villain. But what he didn't know was that I was going to let him do it. Confront him, Olivia warned me. Argue. Don't hint. Don't give him anything. Let him believe you're still the same woman. When the time comes, she paused. Next 6 weeks became the hardest part of everything, because winning wasn't about what I did, it was about what I didn't do. I became invisible, not physically, but emotionally. I stopped reacting, stopped questioning, stopped caring, at least on the surface. I made his coffee every morning. I smiled when he lied. I asked about his day like nothing had changed. And every time he looked at me, he saw exactly what he expected. A woman who didn't know. A woman who wouldn't fight back. A woman who had already lost. And the more he believed that, the more confident he became. And confident people make mistakes. One night, 3 days before the wedding, he finally revealed part of his plan. Clara, he said casually over dinner, I invited Emily to the wedding. I looked up, paused for a second, then smiled. That's thoughtful, I said. Even he seemed surprised. You're okay with that? He asked. Of course, I replied calmly. She works with you. It makes sense. That was the moment he completely let his guard down, because in his mind, I had accepted everything. And when someone believes they've already won, that's when they stop being careful. That same night, I finalized everything. The divorce papers were ready. The financial evidence was organized. The accounts were flagged. And the envelope, the one he would open at the wedding, was complete. Inside it. Divorce filing confirmation, proof of the affair. proof of financial transfers, details of the adultery clause, everything neatly arranged, impossible to deny, impossible to escape. The morning of the wedding, I woke up differently, not nervous, not scared, not broken, but calm, because this wasn't just my son's wedding day. This was the day my life changed. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress, and for the first time in years, I saw myself clearly, not as someone's wife, not as someone's support system, but as someone strong, someone capable, someone who had taken control. Meanwhile, Richard moved around the house like a man preparing for victory. He hummed while getting ready, checked his phone constantly, smiled to himself. He thought everything was going according to his plan. And in a way, it was, because I had let him believe that. As we drove to the venue, he glanced at me. "You look nice," he said. "Thank you," I replied, simple, polite, controlled. He had no idea that sitting right next to him was the person who had already ended his future. And when we walked into that wedding hall, when the lights sparkled, when the music played, when the guests smiled, when Emily took her seat across from me, wearing red, full of confidence, thinking she had already replaced me, I realized something. This wasn't just his stage. It was mine too, because everything that happened next was exactly what I had planned. Every word he said, every move he made, every mistake he thought was his victory was actually his downfall. And when he finally stood up to make his announcement, when he looked me in the eyes, when he said those words, "This is the end for us," he believed he was destroying me. But the truth, he had just activated the final step of my plan. And the envelope I placed in front of him, that wasn't just paper. That was judgment. That was consequence. That was the moment everything he built started collapsing. Some people think karma is slow. They're wrong. Sometimes it happens in seconds. The moment Richard opened that envelope, his entire world collapsed. I had just stepped outside the reception hall when it happened. The night air was cool, quiet, almost peaceful for a brief second. It felt like everything was over. But then, a scream tore through the silence, loud, raw, desperate. The kind of sound that doesn't come from anger, it comes from panic, from fear, from the exact moment someone realizes they've made a mistake they can't fix. I stopped walking, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to hear it slowly. I turned my head toward the glass windows of the hall, and there he was, Richard, standing in the center of the room, the envelope torn open in his hands, papers scattered across the table like pieces of his life falling apart. His face had lost all color, the confidence gone, the control gone. All that was left was fear, real fear. He flipped through the pages quickly, his hands shaking, his eyes scanning every line like he was hopping, praying it wasn't real. But it was. Every word, every number, every piece of proof real behind him. The room had fallen into chaos. Guests whispering, chairs shifting, people standing up, trying to understand what was happening. But no one spoke loudly, because they all knew something serious had just happened. Emily leaned closer, trying to read over his shoulder. "Richard, what is this?" she asked, her voice tight. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because he was still reading, still processing, still realizing that he had just destroyed himself in front of everyone. Emily grabbed one of the papers from his hand. And as her eyes moved across the page, her expression changed. First confusion, then disbelief, then something colder, something calculating. "This says divorce filing," she said slowly. "Accounts frozen." Her voice rose slightly. "What does that mean?" That's when Richard finally spoke. She knew, he whispered. Emily froze. "What?" "She knew everything," he said louder now, his voice cracking. "She's been planning this." The entire table went silent, every word echoed, every person listening, because now the truth wasn't hidden anymore, it was public. And it was ugly. "You told me she wouldn't do anything," Emily snapped, her voice sharp now. "You said she was weak. You said she wouldn't fight back." Richard ran his hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "I thought she was," he said. "She never questioned anything." "She never, well, clearly she did." Emily cut him off. Her voice wasn't emotional. It wasn't hurt, it was angry. But not because of betrayal, because of loss. And that's when everything became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't love, this was a deal. And the deal had just fallen apart. "What about the account?" Emily demanded. "The money," Richard looked down at the papers again. "Frozen," he said weakly. "All of them." For a second, no one moved, no one spoke. And then Emily stood up so suddenly her chair fell backward with a loud crash. She repeated, "What do you mean frozen?" "It means we can't access anything," Richard said, his voice barely holding together. The room reacted instantly, gasps, whispers, shock spreading from table to table. But Emily didn't care about any of that. "What about the apartment?" she snapped. "The lease is in my name." Richard didn't answer. "What about my car?" she continued. "My payments, she stopped. Because suddenly she understood all of it, the lifestyle, the gifts, the security, everything she thought she had was gone. And just like that, her expression changed completely. No more anger, no more panic, just cold calculation. She looked at Richard like he was nothing, like he was a mistake. "You ruined everything," she said quietly. Those words hit harder than anything else that night, because they weren't emotional, they were final. Then she grabbed her purse and walked away. Just like that, no argument, apology, no loyalty, no love, gone. And in that moment, Richard lost everything. Not just his wife, not just his money, but the woman he thought he was risking everything for. The room stayed silent as she left, 40 people watching a man realize he had nothing left. Daniel stood up slowly, his face pale, his eyes filled with something between anger and disbelief. "Dad," he said quietly, "how could you do this?" Richard didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say. The truth had already been exposed. Every lie, every secret, every betrayal, all of it right there on the table. And then he shouted my name. "Clara." His voice echoed through the hall. "Clara, get back here." Outside, I closed my eyes for a second, not because I was emotional, but because I knew this moment was coming. The final confrontation, the last piece of the story. Slowly, I turned around and walked back inside. Every step was calm, controlled, intentional. The entire room went silent again as I entered, all eyes on me, not with pity, not with sympathy, but with something different, respect. I walked straight to the table where Richard stood, where the papers still lay scattered, where his world had just ended. "You wanted to talk," I said calmly. His face was red, his eyes desperate. "You can't do this," he said. "Not like this." I looked around the room. "At your son's wedding," I replied quietly. "You chose that, not me." Stepped closer. "What's going on?" he asked, I looked at him gently. I filed for divorce this morning, I said, and your father has been having an affair while stealing from our accounts. Gasps filled the room again, but this time no one was confused. They understood everything. This is an overreaction, Richard said quickly. You're trying to ruin me over a mistake. I turned toward him slowly. A mistake, I repeated. Then I picked up one of the papers. $45,000, I said clearly. That's not a mistake. That's a plan. Heavy, unavoidable. You built a life behind my back, I continued. With my money. That's not a mistake. That's betrayal. Richard had no response, because there wasn't one. And for the first time in 30 years, he had nothing to hide behind. No lies, no control, no power, just truth and consequences. I gathered the papers calmly, placed them back into my folder, and looked at him one last time. You wanted to end this publicly, I said. I did. Then I turned and walked away again. But this time, no one stopped me, because everyone in that room knew. This wasn't a woman walking away from her life. This was a woman walking into a new one. People think the story ends when you walk away. It doesn't. That's just where the real story begins. 6 months after the wedding, I was standing in my own kitchen. But it wasn't the same kitchen. It wasn't the same life. And I wasn't the same woman. Sunlight poured through the windows as I carefully placed a tray of freshly baked peach cobbler on the counter. The smell filled the room, warm, sweet, familiar for a moment. I closed my eyes, because this was the life I had once given up. And now I had it back. The divorce was finalized faster than anyone expected, not because it was simple, but because it was undeniable. The evidence was too strong, the financial records too clear, the prenuptial agreement too precise. Richard didn't fight for long. He couldn't. Every attempt his lawyer made collapsed under the weight of facts. The adultery clause alone was enough to break his case. But combined with the financial transfers, it destroyed it completely. In the end, I kept the house, most of the savings, and control of everything he thought he had protected. But the real loss wasn't financial. For him, it was personal. His business started falling apart within weeks. Clients talk, and scandals travel fast. No one wants to trust a man who can't even be honest in his own home. Without me managing the accounts, without the stability I had quietly provided for years, things began to slip. Small mistakes turned into big ones. And slowly, the empire he thought he built alone collapsed. Emily, she disappeared even faster. 2 weeks. That's how long she stayed after the wedding. 2 weeks of trying to figure things out. Weeks of pretending she still believed in him. But the moment she realized the money was gone, so was she. No goodbye, no loyalty, no second chances. Just gone, just like that. And Richard, he called me once, 3 months after everything ended. I remember the moment clearly. I was in this same kitchen, preparing an order for a client. My phone rang. His name appeared on the screen. For a second, I just looked at it. 30 years of memories reduced to a name I no longer needed to answer. But I did, not because I cared, but because I wanted to hear what he would say. Clara. His voice was different, smaller, quieter. I made a mistake. I didn't respond. I thought I knew what I wanted, he continued. I thought I was starting a better life. A better life. The irony almost made me smile. I was wrong, he said. There was a long pause, then, can we talk? Maybe fix this? Fix this? After everything, after the betrayal, after the lies, after trying to destroy me in front of everyone, he still thought this was something that could be repaired. That was his final mistake. I hope you find peace, I said calmly, and for a second he didn't speak. I really do, I added. You won't find it with me. Silence, heavy, final. And then I hung up. That was the last time I ever spoke to him. Not because I was angry, not because I was hurt, but because I was done. Meanwhile, my life moved forward, not slowly, not painfully, but powerfully. I reopened my catering business, but this time I did it differently, bigger, better, stronger. I named it Second Chance Kitchen, because that's exactly what it was. A second chance, not just at a career, but at life. At first, it was small, a few clients, a few orders, but word spread quickly, because I didn't just cook food. I created experiences, memories, moments people felt. And slowly, the business grew event by event, client by client, until one day I realized something. I wasn't rebuilding. I was creating something completely new, something that belonged only to me. Daniel visited often. He would sit at the counter, watching me work, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. You're different, he told me once. I looked at him. How? He thought for a moment. Stronger, he said. Then he smiled, happier. He was right, because for the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else. I wasn't sacrificing. I wasn't waiting. I was living fully, freely, on my own terms. But here's the twist, the part no one expects. The part even Richard never saw coming. I didn't win because I destroyed him. I won because I found myself again. Losing him wasn't my tragedy. It was my freedom. His betrayal didn't break me. It revealed me. The woman I had buried under years of sacrifice came back stronger than ever. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I think about that moment at the wedding. The envelope, the scream, the chaos. And I realized something. That wasn't the moment my life ended. That was the moment it began. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever been betrayed, lied to, undervalued, remember this. You are not the end of someone else's story. You are the beginning of your own. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not hurting the person who hurt you. It's becoming someone they can never reach again. And sometimes justice doesn't sound like anger. It sounds like silence, peace, and your own laughter echoing in a life you finally own. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? If this story touched you, subscribe for more powerful stories. See you in the next story.